Let's have a music revolution. Revolution, revolution. Let's have a music revolution. Revolution, revolution. Everybody clap your hands. Music revolution. Everybody clap your hands. Everybody clap your hands. Everybody clap your hands.
Hi, you're here on Music Revolution with Andrew Soos, music enthusiast and sometimes YouTuber, together with, I guess, professional plastic EP, a man who has curated music. I'd call him a historian of music over the last 5 years with over 1,400 interviews. And the reason behind our show is to bring great musicians and great stories to you. And so without further ado, I want to introduce to you a man who is not only an entrepreneur, a music journeyman, and a man who, as soon as he opens his mouth, you're going to want to sit back and listen to the entire program. I promise you, Mr. Steve Douglas. Steve, how do you do?
Cheers, everyone. Good, great. It's good to talk with you again, Andrew. What language are we going to do tonight in?
I forgot to mention that you're a linguist as well.
Cunning linguist.
Welcome to the show, Steve.
Last time.
Hey, Plastic, how you doing?
Good, man. I'll be speaking Australian. How you going, mate?
I've been here 20 years. I can understand 99% of it.
Good on you, mate.
Last time I caught up with you was at the Cherry Bar in Richmond. And at that time, you were on stage and you were playing with your current band, the ska band, the Resignators.
Correct. And you were dressed as a sailor, looking for a good time out on the town, were you?
Had a good time as well. But what I want to do is take us a little bit back, because people can already tell from your accent, it's steeped in the South. I want to hear a little bit about your growing up, what really enthused you with music. And then we're going to talk about some high points, things, for example, of your involvement in the shock metal band Gwar, a band I would say that would make Kiss look tame. Early proto-punk with Death Piggy, and then moving forward to, I guess, your experiences in Australia and progressing through bluegrass music and onto ska.
Sure.
So tell me a little bit about growing up.
Well, it was a great journey. I was born in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, which is where the University of Alabama is. Mom had already gotten her degree and got a job teaching there, and Dad came back from Korea. He was a Marine in Korea, and fortunately dodged all the bullets and came back and went to University of Alabama to study engineering. And I was born in I think his second year there, and it was deep South Alabama. Right as civil rights was really becoming an issue. That was a real mind opener. Growing up in that time, Dad and Mom and Dad would take me to, they were poor and students, and they'd take me to the psychology department and drop me off for psychology experimentation. So I blame those folks for my insatiable quest for knowledge, which continues to this day, because as a infant, I was put in the hands of these behavioral psychologists to let them do no telling what kind of experiments on me. I don't remember. But yeah, I grew up in the deep South. It gave me, for better or worse, the South has a lot of where the red states are and all that sort of stuff are now. It has a lot of derogatory connotations sometimes, but nonetheless, it is an area of the U.S. that's, enriched with great music and that sort of thing. I think my first memory of really understanding music and its production and its packaging was I think it was the second grade. I had a teacher named Miss Kuzmicki, and it happened to be my best friend's aunt. So she would let me get away with murder. And she knew I liked music and took me to the library and showed me that they had records there. And so I could go to the elementary school library And I think the first record I played there and just really discovered was the Wabash Cannonball by Roy Acuff. So that good Southern, country rockabilly kind of stuff. My dad probably had a bit of rockabilly in him. He was, a good small town Southern boy, only child. Got to see the world by going to Korea, so it got him out of his, one horse town where, his mother, my grandma Sadie, was the ran the I guess you'd call it the equivalent of Happy Days, the soda parlor, So Dad worked in he's a soda jerk and made sodas and that kind of stuff. Yeah, but I think that was my first real, memory of a particular music moving me, and that was the start of a long journey that continued until this day. I also remember my dad was playing on a softball team. I think I was a little older, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and after his Sunday games, he would. This was when he was working with U.S. Steel in the mines in Birmingham, and his softball team, his fellow mine inspectors, would play on Sundays, and we'd all go to an ice cream shop afterwards, and they had a jukebox there, and he would just send me over with nickels. It wasn't quarters or dollars back then; it was nickels and 5-cent pieces. And I remember asking him, "What should I play?" And he said, "Anything that says Johnny Cash." So that was another introduction there. But yeah, that's steeped in the roots of the Deep South was definitely where it all began. And as a banjo player, I'm sure you can appreciate that. And it's the kind of thing that gets under your skin and never goes away. Yeah.
Steve, is there any truth? I've heard a rumor about you learning music, guitar as a young man from a voodoo priestess
Oh
in the
yeah,
Caribbean.
that's absolutely positively true. It was two of them. It was so Dad got transferred to headquarters in Pittsburgh. There was a brief 3 years in Pittsburgh, and that's where I started my first band. But I hadn't had guitar lessons yet. I was self-taught, and in the days before YouTube, just trying to make a G chord or an F chord. F was really hard at that point. The Beatles had come around. I had Rubber Soul, and I was, I was just trying to strum a guitar. But Pittsburgh was too cold for Mom and Dad, so they put in for a request for a transfer and got shipped off to Nassau, Bahamas. And that's where I took my first lessons. By the time I got to Nassau, I was 10 and just finished 5th grade. My first live show was 5th grade. Miss Arnold, who was very beautiful, young blonde that I was enraptured with. And I was kind of her teacher's pet. I was pretty smart, and she liked my style. And in addition to starting a Man from Uncle Club, I started my first band with my two friends, Jimmy Hintz and Judd Christoph. Don't know where they are these days. But Judd played drums on cardboard boxes, and Jimmy and I played guitars. And our repertoire was about 4 songs. I think we did Please Please Me, Love Love Me Do, Red Rubber Ball, and we tried Sounds of Silence, but I think we slaughtered it, But
I was just going to say, living in Nassau, that's where they filmed Help.
That's where they filmed Help. So we got to Nassau right after the Beatles. I saw Ringo in his speedboat years later go by and waving, but they loved the Bahamas, and that's where they filmed Help, and they had a great time doing that, as you can tell watching the film. And yeah, we went there the year after that, so that the island was still buzzing from that. But I had one of my dad's workmates, Mr. Kohler. I can't remember his first name, but his wife.
Wasn't Coca-Cola, was it?
No, Kohler, Kohler, and his wife. They were really rooted in like they were connected to like Pete Seeger and a lot of the folkies and the Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan, folk scene that was coming up, the kind of radical left pushing this, workers' music and stuff like that. And this guitar kills fastest and that sort of thing.
Peter, Paul, and Mary. I just want to say, I bought a songbook here in Australia of Peter, Paul, and Mary, and guess what? They must have come in and done a performance in the 60s because this songbook is actually signed by them. Where their picture is, they've signed it by ink.
I bet they did. And of course, the Seekers were happening here.
Yeah, hang on a minute. You just said the magic word. Here's a songbook by the Seekers printed in England, right? It's like the Monkeys one in the 60s. And look at this. Right, no one's seen this because it's very, very rare to buy. And I just happen to have this close by.
Oh,
so how's that?
That's wild. Oh, they were huge. They were absolutely huge. The first, probably, I guess, the first big export from Australia.
Yeah, exactly.
But back to the story. So this couple, the Kohlers, they had this little club called the Ballads and Blues. And what I did is they had 3 young babies, like ranging from like 6 months to 3 years old. They pumped them out. They were back to back. And I traded babysitting for guitar lessons. So I was, as a 10-year-old, I was babysitting 3 toddlers, 3 infants, and they gave me guitar lessons. And after they got to a point where they didn't need me anymore, and I still wanted guitar lessons, and Dad put his feelers out there, and he came up with these 2 sisters, the Kamler sisters. And they indeed were, I thought they were ancient. They were probably in their 50s. They were 2 sisters that lived in a little shotgun shack down in Nassau. And they gave me guitar lessons for 50 cents an hour. And yet they would feed me cookies. So I don't know how they made any money. But most of that was where my love of island music and ska and calypso and ska was just happening, and we only had one radio station. On good weather days, you could pick up a little bit from Miami, but one Nassau radio station, that was ZNS, and they only played ska, calypso, some soul, some Southern soul, Muscle Shoals stuff, Clarence Carter, stuff like that. But yeah, I did take them out. After the fact, I had no clue. I saw no evidence of sacrifice of chickens or blood sacrifices or anything. And I was only 10, so I really wouldn't have probably recognized it anyway. But before he passed away, my dad said, "You do know they were voodoo priestesses, don't you?" I said, "No, I didn't." And apparently they were the go-to for advice for divination by all the Bahamian politicians. Should we do this policy? Should we let this casino in? And they would do their hoodoo voodoo, and which is, I think in the Bahamas, is called Obia instead of voodoo. And they would come up with some advice for them. Yeah.
Steve, the sort of guitar that they were playing, was it more nylon or steel? And
that
tell
was
me a bit about that music.
At that point, that was nylon string guitars.
Yeah.
So one of the sisters, the one that was the main guitar teacher, played a nylon guitar, as did I at that point. It was something like a Yamaha, something like that. It wasn't a horrible guitar. I could, fret it. It was a little difficult, wide neck for a little kid. But the other sister accompanied on the piano. So, yeah, but it was definitely nylon string guitar. And it was that stuff that, like Ry Cooder discovered in the Bahamas, that Calypso, Blind Blake, and a lot of folks like that were doing. And of course, right at that time, also, Harry Belafonte had the first million selling album in the world, which was all Calypso, Yellowbird, My Island in the Sun. It was a lot of those songs primarily, and early ska, Prince Buster, Byron Lee and the Dragonaires, that sort of thing.
We're going to move on to ska a little bit later, but just for those who don't know, how do you describe ska music?
Well, ska was a particular regional music, a time and a place that came about with Jamaican independence. And it came out of Jamaica had its own style of calypso called mento, which had a unique instrumentation. It had banjo. It had the bass was played on this kind of box with leather tongues and boom, 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 and which was called a kalimba, but it's not like the little thumb piano. And guitars, and started getting horns in there eventually, because that was largely due to that came a little more with ska. But it was a time and a place where Jamaica wanted it had its own new national identity, and it wanted its cut loose from, the British colonialization kind of thing. And it wanted its own new sound. And it evolved, like I said, out of that mento, but it took on its own life. It's characterized by a lot of, basically music is kind of divided, where the beat is on the 1 and the 3, or on the 2 and the 4, which is the backbeat. And it's, when you see people clapping at concerts, is it boom, boom, or is it boom, pop, boom? And it was the first, the backbeat. There was a producer named Coxsone Dodd. There was a bunch of Aussies there too. They were instrumental in developing ska. We'll segue into that. These guys from Craigieburn, I think, had a band called the Caribs, and they were playing up in the Gold Coast. It was at that point kind of a Latin jazz band, had congas and guitar and keyboard. Had a real Latin-y
feel. That's the Gold Coast of America we're talking about?
No. These guys were Aussies. They were playing up at the Gold Coast Surfers Paradise, and they got a call from Jamaica, from the club called the Glass Bucket. And they said, we'd like to get you guys down here for 2 weeks to come and play in our club. It was Glass Bucket was like, this was before Jamaican independence. This was 1958. And these guys said, sure, we'll go to Jamaica. And they went there for a 2-week gig and ended up living there almost the rest of their lives. They married Jamaican girls, and they were largely this group, Dennis Sindri, and he was the guitarist. There was an engineer there named Graham Goodall, who was an Aussie radio engineer that had been brought in by the BBC to install Jamaica's first FM radio station. So he met up with them, and they just started recording, and they were uncredited on almost all the really early ska records. They helped form the Scatolites, which was one of the biggest Jamaican bands, although there's a few Cubans in there. They were, at ground zero there. And I was fortunately, I think pretty well all of them have passed away just in the last couple of years, but I was able to talk to them. They did a big, couple of big shows down in Melbourne twice, where as the Caribs reunion shows, even though they hadn't played in 10, 20 years together, organized by Mohair Slim, who does the PBS show on Jamaican ska. So it's curious that this music that came from Jamaica all the way across the world, that Australians were instrumental in the formation of that genre. Yeah. And of course, ska morphed and got up momentum. There were spin-off genres, rock steady, lovers rock. But one summer, I think it was 1965 or 64, 65, these guys would go, ska was made for the streets. They would go out en masse and dance in these big street festivals with sound systems. The Jamaicans would pull out these giant boxes and sound systems. It'd be sponsored by an alcohol company so they could sell alcohol, and a studio. And they would dance in the street, and they'd dress up to the nines, their suits and their ties and their hats and the fedoras, which those styles, are still evident in ska today. But one summer it got so hot, and they kind of discovered marijuana, that the music slowed down from a boom chop boom chop boom chop boom to a boom chop boom chop, and reggae was born. So that was the beginning of reggae. And there's songs where it's hard to say, is this reggae or is this ska? But ska came as a precursor to reggae.
My cheat, Steve, is to listen for the horns. If it's got horns,
yeah,
I sort of say it's probably ska.
There's some horns in reggae too. I mean, Bob Marley put some horns in there, and stuff. The predominance of horns were a great thing. That was largely due to one benevolent Catholic priest who he solicited donations to start and brass instruments in the 50s, to start a school for wayward boys band. And about half of the ska musicians that came up and made it somewhere, and a good significant portion of the reggae guys, went to that school. Bob Marley, Don Drummond, the greatest trombone player, Alfonso, who played sax with the Skatalites and the Caribs. A lot of these guys, if they showed some promise, it was a way to get them off the streets, because it was a pretty violent time. It was a pretty poor time, as it wasn't a violent revolution, but all of a sudden there was independence, and a lot of people were still living in extreme poverty. So this Alpha School for Boys still exists to this day. And, like our friends Tim and April have the Supernova International Ska Festival that the Resignators got to play. They have started a foundation, the Supernova Alliance, which helps, contribute towards this Alpha School for Boys. And they bring over young people. They sponsor people to come to the festival and perform, that kind of thing. So to this day, it's providing an outlet. And let's face it, what better way to take a child with promise that needs some, road to a good future? What better way to do it than to give them the ability to play music? So
wonderful. Now, Steve, your musical taste and direction took a left turn. Was it around the early 80s you got into, I guess, an early punk band, Death Piggy?
Yeah, it was 82. I was a big classic rock fan before that, and I had nothing against bands I loved bands like The Who and Zeppelin and, all those great, classic rock bands, and saw quite a few of them, and smaller bands as well. But, punk rock was, again, a time and a place, is that reaction to corporate rock. Back then there was and anti-rock stars. Back then there was 3 major labels, and maybe 12 bands would get signed a year, and punk rock, of course, leveled that playing field a lot, because it wasn't as much about talent at that point as getting out there and speaking your mind. And a lot of it had to do with reaction to Margaret Thatcher, of course, in the UK. and probably subsequently Reagan in America. And it was a rebellious a way for kids that didn't want to be normal, to express themselves. So yeah, I embraced it. I wasn't as much as big on the Sex Pistols as I was, the other punk bands that came along behind them, Blondie, Talking Heads. I always liked Iggy Pop, who was ahead of his time. He was punk before punk, things like that. But it's
the Stooges, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But when after I graduated from university, I graduated in '78. That was when all this was happening. So yeah, my course of direction, swayed for sure. The first album I recorded for myself in '78 had horns, had ska, had punk, but had a lot of classic rock in it too. That sort of thing. Probably a few prog rock influences as well.
Yeah. I got to say, Steve, this is a fascinating story because you're filling in things from over there about ska and with the Australians and things like that no one knows. So, I mean, this journey is really great. How do we go from here now to your rock, this band that you played with?
So basically, after I graduated from university, I moved to Richmond, Virginia, which was an hour away from William and Mary, where I went to school, and it was a punk rock mecca. And there was so many bands, so many clubs. It's probably like St. Kilda was when Nick Cave and Roland S. Howard were coming up. It was just happening, within a month of moving there. I was asked to join 2 or 3 bands, and it ended up about 5 bands. And they were all different, Death Piggy was, I guess it was a 3-piece. It was kind of, I guess you would we called it silly core, like hardcore, but hardcore in the sense of like hardcore punk rock, not hardcore metal. Mud Helmet, one of my other bands, it was kind of drunk punk. It was more like the Ramones, and we did open for the Ramones a few times and toured with them. Or Cheetah Chrome from the Dead Boys came down and became an extra guitarist for a while with us. So it had that drunk punk thing. I had a band called the Snake Handlers that was more of a Southern Gothic gun club, Cramps. We actually covered a Paul Revere and the Raiders song in that. I saw the interview with Fang. He would be happy about that. I think we covered Hungry is what it was. Yeah. But, it was going back to that. Punk rock wasn't that removed from a lot of the garage rock that was happening in the 60s. There was a certain element of punk to Paul Revere and the Raiders, and to MC5, and to and to the Monkees.
Yeah,
I was right. You guys were Monkees fan. I was a huge Monkees fan. I watched every episode, and I need to go back and watch them all again. Especially the last episodes where they all got to direct or bring their own musical guests.
Yeah. We just interviewed
I know
Louis Shelton, and he went right through it, so we're right on it. And having you and being a great Monkees fan, let me tell you, that's fantastic. But I want you to know that I got a Monkees poster. It took me 52 years to get it signed by all 4 Monkees, and Mike Nesmith was the last one to sign it, and he signed it across his arm. I'm just going to show you the picture of that now, and you're going to love it. I mean, that's unbelievable. He signed it.
With Whiteout. His mother invented Whiteout.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's right. I like that. That's a great gag. But Run DMC sampled Mary Mary, and Mike Nesmith didn't know anything about it until someone told him, and then he sued and got his share. Is that unbelievable or what?
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. One of my friends in college growing up, he ended up going on to great fame as a solo piano player, Bruce Hornsby. And he ended up playing with the Grateful Dead for a while too, short while. he wrote that song. That's just the way it is. Ba-da-da, ba-da-da, ba-da-da. That's just the way it is. About integration, segregation, racism, and it was sampled by Tupac. Yeah, made him a boatload of money.
Steve, your music's gone from the extremes of Death Piggy, punk, across to, I guess, the most flamboyant and spectacular stage show I think you can conceive of, and that was working with Gwar.
Well, that spawned out of Death Piggy. So Dave, the lead singer, Death Piggy was just three of us. A drummer named Sean who's passed away. Dave, the singer who's passed away 11 years ago this week. And Death Piggy, Dave was a crazy fella. He was a great lead vocalist, and he played bass in Death Piggy. But he always came up with some different, shtick for each show, like to make it a spectacle. We had a pinata filled with cat shit and money, or we brought all our rubbish and dumped it on the stage, and he'd roll around in it. One day he wore those exercise pants where you're supposed to sweat in them, the rubber pants, and he filled it with gallons of mayonnaise, but one time we had a rehearsal space in this old abandoned milk bottle factory. It's kind of a squat, but a guy had it and rented out rehearsal spaces, like there was rooms everywhere. It was huge. It was a square city block. Each turret of the 4 turrets on the corners of the block were giant brick milk bottles, white milk bottles. But there was also the local college had a good music school, but a good film school, Virginia Commonwealth. And there was these guys, Hunter Jackson and Chuck Varga and Dave Muscle and this crew of Don Draculich. They were making a film called a B-grade sci-fi film called Scumdogs from Outer Space. So they had these props and costumes. And one day we were walking past that, and Dave said, "Oh God, we got to wear those." And asked the guys, "Can we borrow those?" And we want to do a show, and they knew us in Death Piggy, and they sure. So we wrote a whole set of songs in a day, and basically put those costumes on and became Gwar, which had this whole mythology about it, kind of drawn from what the guys were doing with the film. We were from Antarctica. Our spaceship had crashed into Antarctica, and we were released on the world to destroy it. Yeah. And to call attention to the evil of the world, So
amazing.
Well, that was
I'm not exaggerating.
That
I'm
was
not exaggerating to say it's the most dramatic thing I've ever seen.
Oh,
if you haven't
is.
seen it, have a look.
Because
we're talking about costumes from like space operas, spears going through internal organs, bodily fluids being excreted on stage, stuff that would make, I think, heavy metal, Nordic music look tame.
Yeah, today. Without a doubt. I mean, maybe black metal is a little more really in that way, but I cannot think of a band that stretched the limits any further, with genitalia and occasionally paid the price as far as arrest. And, for a while, when the last years I was in the band, we were absolutely banned by the British government from entering the UK. But they're still going to this day. And we're talking about 30 something years later. So, yeah. And it's gotten bigger, but yet a little more polished. It was gritty and underground and DIY in the beginning. Yeah. But some great memories from that, without a doubt.
Steve, what brought you to Australia?
Bluegrass. Pure and simple. So after I got out of Gwar, I still had a few more bands after that. I had a band with my ex-wife, a heavy 3-piece called Log. It was inspired by Ren and Stimpy. Log is log. and maybe the Log Lady from Northern Exposure and a few other things. But it was, I thought log, that's a heavy word. It was a heavy band. It was a heavy three-piece, kind of because it had female and male vocals, and a big heavy metalish drummer playing through full stack Marshalls, full stack Ampegs, double stack Marshall, double stack Ampegs. It was crunchy stuff. Got compared a lot to like Sonic Youth or Hole or Babes in Toyland. But then the ex-wife got pregnant and we had a baby, and you couldn't really play that loud music. So we really got into bluegrass. And bluegrass, you could take the kids with you to the festival. You know, they sit around the campfire with you, and you could pick and grin, and you had nice folks all around you. People would take turns watching the kids, that kind of thing. We had a really nice trailer and a truck, and we just caravan around and go to bluegrass festivals. And in the course of that, we really became infatuated with the Carter family. And, after we broke up 10 years later, I was pretty much one of the country's foremost experts on the Carter family, which were really the beginning of what you might call the bridge between folk music and country music. Back then they called it was divided. If you were white, you could be playing the same song. If you were white, it was called hillbilly music. That was what it was marketed as. If you were black, it was race music, and that was the way they separated it. But it was the same stuff. It came from old hillbilly settling, old Scottish, Irish, and British, German hillbilly settling in the mountains in America, in the Appalachians. Didn't have a pot to piss in, but they loved to get through their days making whiskey and playing music. And you could grow corn in the mountains, but you couldn't grow much else, so they'd make some corn whiskey. But after we were separated, got divorced, I was trying to figure out what to do next with my life. And this bluegrass star, James King, who had played on some of my alt country albums, a band called the Shiners, it was a whole nother episode. But that was the lead singer from my old punk rock band, Mud Helmet, and myself and a few others doing what you would call alt country music. So, more acoustic-y, but dark, hillbilly stuff. And this guy, James King, said, "Steve, you need to get out of this country. I'm going to Australia next week. Why don't you tag along?" And I said, "Wow, sure." So he got me in touch with the Harrietville Bluegrass Festival people. And I said, "Hey, I'm coming with James King. Happy to do a seminar on the Carter family for you." And they said, "Sure, absolutely." And I came down to Harrietville in 2005, 20 years ago, and did a seminar on the Carter family. After I did that, I was sitting up in the lodge, playing my acoustic guitar on the deck of the lodge, looking up at the southern stars. I'd never seen anything like that. The sky painted white almost with stars. And you get some good stars up there because no city lights. And out of the bush walks my wife, Stacy, playing the fiddle. And we met up, and that determined right then and there that I would be moving to Australia. So took me about 6 months to sell everything I owned because I couldn't bring much, and hopped on a flight and landed in Dalesford. So here I am still.
Fantastic. I got a question for you.
What's that?
Now, I want to know about this party with Green Day. Can you tell everyone about that?
Well, yeah, I did that. I didn't party with them because I was already a grown up and they were still like kids. Um, and I don't think their dad would have appreciated it. He was driving the van. Um, so on their first East Coast tour, at that point, I was running, and for about a decade after Gwar, um, I ran the punk rock venue, one of the punk rock venues, but pretty much the one of the most uh, prolific punk rock venues in Richmond, Virginia, called Twisters. Book the bands, run the sound, tend the bar, set up the bands, all that kind of stuff. I did basically 3 bands a night, 7 days a week for 10 years. Some of them were great local bands, which is, I always looked after local bands, but most of them were touring bands, bands like Green Day came and played. I think I paid Green Day. It was under $1,000. It might have been 600, something like that. Their dad was driving the van, after the show, they were sitting around talking to fans and their dad popped his head and said, "Come on, kids, got to get back to the hotel," and, yeah, that, I think they worked out pretty good. Bands like Rancid, who became huge. The Butthole Surfers. One of my favorite bands I booked was a band called Morphine out of New York with Paul Sandman was his name. Played a 2-string bass with a baritone sax. They went on to fame and fortune. But a lot of the indie bands, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, the Toasters, a lot of ska punk came through there. And yeah, so I didn't really party with Green Day so much because they weren't old enough to party yet.
You've brought up ska, and so let's talk about your current project and some of the magnificent
there it is.
records.
That's the most recent thing, and that was recorded right here in our own studios, Raku Recording, which I can spin around and you can see. I've got a song up I'm working on right now, and the Resignators. Since I joined the Resignators, that's the 3rd full-length album. Stacy, my wife, and I joined the Resignators 15 years ago. Bluebird Tattoo, song I wrote about the Sharpies. I thought that was a really phenomenal micro culture here in Melbourne. I just can't even believe how unified that scene was. The Sharpies with their dance and their dress and their haircuts, and I think it would have gone a lot farther if the press hadn't taken them down as being fighters, whatever. It's like, I'm sure the rockabillys in America got the same thing, but
Steve, you're involved a lot in the artwork for these covers as well, aren't you?
I just got artists to do it. So that one that you just held up, that one right there was done by a great friend of ours named Danny Rebel in Montreal. I had the vision, but I knew he loved Marley. He's a great painter. So I said, give me a painting as Bob Marley as Hermes, like he's in stride kicking a soccer ball. And Danny executed that. Bluebird Tattoo was done, again, it was kind of our concept, but it was done by a young local artist just trying to support her and stuff. I think we did the 3 monkeys on the Monkey Tamarind, and that was just a joint effort amongst the band. The Rabbit Hole album cover was done by a great artist out of Vancouver called Steve Kitchen, who's done a lot of posters and stuff like that, artwork for us, because we do get over to Canada and tour a lot. No, the Rabbit Hole, that one, I think Francis and I just worked on together and put together. But the
Rabbit Hole, the great vocalist for your band.
The Rabbit Hole 12-inch cover, the pink and blue one, That one was done by Steve Kitchen, and his company's called Combination 13 out of Vancouver. And, we knew we were doing an Alice in Wonderland theme, and he realized that beautifully for us. First time I saw it, I went, that's it. He's doing a poster right now for us for our Canadian tour coming up. We'll be going over to play a couple of festivals over there and a few club dates in May and June. And Steve Kitchen, the same guy, has done this beautiful, you'll see it eventually. It's not for public consumption yet. It's a koala as a hockey player. So that's a good one. As Canadian as it gets.
Stephen, I think your best film clip, in my opinion, is Talisman, which I think is an absolutely beautiful piece of work. I'd love to put a small snip of that in this video. It's an excellent piece of work.
And that one did quite well for us. And that was my concept. I wrote that song. The cover was executed by a young local artist, but I told them what I wanted to get out of it. The whole concept of it was all after reading Steinbeck, of a talisman saving your life, and the whole evil eye, and the beautiful the power of the talisman and symbolism and that sort of thing. But that video was done by a Russian named Alex, and basically I scoured Fiverr and went through hundreds of portfolios till I found one I liked and contacted this guy. And I think he lives in, is there a city called Katerinburg, or I don't know. It's not in Moscow. It's some industrial city in Russia. And, that's something the internet allows you to do, is to collaborate with people anywhere, anytime. And I put together a lot of images and sent them to him, and he just did amazing things with them. Yeah.
You never know when you'll hear your music, if not live. I was at Spencer Street Station Toilets a while back, and your video and music was playing. I think from memory it was a cover of a Crowded House
song. It was a
but
cover.
We meet your music in the most unexpected places.
It was a cover of Crowded House, Now We're Getting Somewhere. And I always thought that was quite ironic for somebody sitting on the toilet at Spencer Street. Yes, now we're getting somewhere. It might be to encourage people to complete their actions and move on for the day. I don't know. But that's a great thing.
If we want to hear more of your music, what's the best way to be contacted?
I'd say the best way is, every band these days has a Bandcamp page. So if you go to Bandcamp and put in the Resignators, you'll get everything we've ever done, even stuff that hasn't been released. Some stuff that hadn't even been released to Spotify or Apple Music. That's the best way. And that's a way people can support us, because you can buy a song for $1. You can go to Spotify, you can go to Apple Music and listen. And we could end up getting like 0.000 cents. We still appreciate people listening on there. But if you go to Bandcamp, you can download it in, lossless files, FLAC files, and get better quality. And they do, once a month on Fridays, they do Bandcamp Fridays, where every bit, so if you pay attention to that, or Google when's the next Bandcamp Friday, every bit of the money goes to the artist. So if you buy a song for $1, we get $1. That's one way to put some petrol in the tank. We don't make any money doing this. It costs money, but it's a labor of love that, we don't regret doing. It's just a compulsion for me. I must make music, and as long as I'm doing that, I'm happy. So I guess it's priceless.
Concerts are amazing. They're really full of energy. It's loaded with brass. You can expect trombone, trumpets, keyboards. Stacey's mad on the keyboards with the vocals, and Francis, of course, and Jeremy. It's just a great Great
lately, Stace has started with this newest release. We have
Sugar
celebrate
High.
the Sugar High to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Empire Records. In fact, coming up, I don't know if you've watched Empire Records, but it takes place on April 8th, celebrating Rex Manning Day, a fictitious holiday. There was this, corporate rock star, Rex Manning, but they picked April 8th for the movie to celebrate that day because that was the day Kurt Cobain died. So for Sugar High, for this anniversary, that we did a cover of that, and Stacy even sang a verse in Spanish because we're getting ready to do a Mexican tour later this year, and because it was fun. And she played baritone sax for the first time. She got the big boy sax. She's played tenor on a lot of the records. Live, she predominantly plays keys, but at that Cherry Bar show that you were at, she broke out the big baritone, and she's a short girl with a big sax. So, it's really been great. I've enjoyed watching the last two shows, the Louis Shelton show and the Fang show, and I feel honored to be amongst their company. God, Louis Shelton played on so much stuff, and Fang with, I still remember seeing him. I was in the States then, of course. They must have done about 500 appearances on like Dick Clark and stuff like that. I used to see him every week. And
750 to be exact.
750. There you go.
Yep.
I've turned Andrew onto a podcast I've been listening to, and I'm eagerly awaiting the next episode of it. I've listened to 278 episodes of this podcast. It's not a video thing like you guys, but it's a podcast that's available on all platforms. It's a history of rock and roll and 500 songs, and it just reminds me how big rock and roll is, just how big it is, how many manifestations, what it took to create this, what was going on in people's minds, and it affected the world in such huge ways. And I'm just grateful that I have had my little place in it and have been along for the great ride.
That was Music Revolution. You're here with Plastic EP and Andrew Soos, and thank you so much for Steve Douglas. Stay tuned for more.
Steve, I want to say it's been a pleasure having you on the show with fascinating stories. And don't miss an episode of Music Revolution. Thanks, everyone.
Revolution!
I'm not discontent. I like to think I live my life well spent. And as the seasons turn, I watch the fires burn. It started and it ended with a kiss. It happened in the spring when the devil pulled the strings and the pedals were like buttons on the ground. Bring me a promised land. She left me in the autumn when I hit rock bottom. Dead leaves were soaking up the sound. It started and it ended with a kiss. Welcome to the summer of our love again. I picked the crimson flower for your head. Like in '69, all the planets fell in line. It started and it ended with a rose. It happened in the spring when the devil pulled the strings and the pedals were like buttons on the ground. Bring me a diamond man. She left me in the autumn when I hit rock bottom. Dead leaves were soaking up the sound. It started and it ended. It started and it ended. It started and it ended with a kiss.
Shelly was a sharpie with a Walkman in her pocket, listening to Lovey Lloyd. Her boyfriend Skeeter was a Richmond panel beater, rumbled with the Brody boys. Spent my money on a haircut, like Bowie in Aladdin sang. Short in the front, long in the back, never be the same. Blues the tattoo, I remember you till the day I die. When you danced, you could make it fly. Blue the tattoo, I remember you till the day I die. When you danced, you could make it fly. Kept the collie clean and a stagger's jeans and a pleated mini skirt. But her platform shoes were dusty from dancing in the dirt. Caught the red rider up to Sunbury, Skeeter got in a rage. Danced all day to the colored balls, pulled clean off the stage. Spent my money on a haircut, said I thought you were anything but. Think again. Sometimes reputations outlive their applications. Sometimes fires don't go out. You don't plan with them.